Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Inside Boxing Weekly on the Grueling Truth Radio Network, brought to you by Gridiron Mo, an interactive football app where you get to call what you think the offense or defense should do during a live NFL game and see what all others have called also. Check out Gridiron Mo at www.gridironmo.com. I want to welcome in, as always, my co-host, Jeremiah Preisser. Of course, I'm Mike Goodpaster. I almost forgot to say that, Jeremiah, but how you doing tonight, Jeremiah?
I'm very good. Very excited to be here. Always excited to be here. Always pleasant to talk to you.
And anybody out there listening, I didn't forget what my name was. I just forgot to tell everybody. There's a difference there, because a lot of times I forget stuff. I got a dog named Rambo. Sometimes I'll call my kids Rambo, so it seems to really irritate them. But we had a pay-per-view card last night that was actually, I thought, pretty decent. We had Oscar Valdez. There was actually a couple really good fights, and then there was the main event. But we'll start off with Oscar Valdez stopping Osawa in the 7th round. What was your take on Valdez? To me, he seems a little bit careless.
Yeah, I think he's a technically solid fighter. I think he's got a lot going for him in terms of natural ability. But last night he loaded up shot after shot, and he just looked a bit sloppy doing so. If he would have just tightened it up, and just kind of let it flow and let the knockout come, I think he would have gotten him out of there a bit sooner. I mean, Osawa, to his credit, he had a nice beard. He took a lot of the shots on the chin without budging, but, it was just a thorough beat down, and I think Osawa's corner was I think they were right in just not letting it continue. But, Valdez looks good, and I look forward to him, hopefully fighting the best at 126.
Yeah, and I would say that's probably something where Valdez, that was really his first big shot, and I think he was pressing to impress people. Yeah,
no, I agree. I think, he just had the spotlight on him and just wanted, to make this noteworthy. I mean, I've heard some people telling him to step up the competition. I mean, this is his first defense. This is typical of boxing. Whenever people win, a title belt, they typically take a softer touch in the beginning. So no harm, no foul, in my opinion. I just hope he steps it up. A lot of good fighters at 126, and I'd like to see him fight any one of them.
All right, and then we had what I thought was the fight of the night last night, Jesse Magdaleno, who was a guy that I don't think anybody knew much about because he hadn't really fought anybody. Comes up, upsets Nonito Donaire, unanimous decision. Number one, what do you think of the decision?
I didn't think the decision was that bad. I thought some of the commentating skewed it a bit, but I was following along with some of the round-by-round discussions on, Eastside Boxing, and, from the scorecards there and from, my own scorecard, I thought it was a toss-up. I thought it could have gone either way. Magdaleno looked like he boxed pretty well in the early going. Donaire came on, strong in the late rounds and had Magdaleno hurt a number of times. But I didn't think the scorecards were that bad. I thought Magdaleno could have taken it.
Well, if you'd have told me beforehand the fight was close, I'd have told you Donaire would have won the fight because you would think that's the way it goes. Maybe Magdaleno's got some pictures of Bob Arum in some compromising positions or something.
Yeah, blackmailing Bob. Maybe that's what it is. All I know is Bob.
And you brought up the announcers. I mean, I was pretty excited when I didn't have to hear Jim Lampley and them and Max Kellerman. But then you fill that in with Stephen Smith.
Oh, my God.
Stephen A. Smith, should have not have been on a boxing show, I don't think. And I thought overall, the announcing on that show was pretty horrid.
No, and I think most people agree. In fact, I saw a lot of complaints on social media about especially Stephen A. Smith. Because he wasn't insightful. He seemed more argumentative than anything. Like him and Bradley.
He wanted to be Skip Bayless, and Stephen doesn't have Skip Bayless anymore.
Yeah, I guess he's missing him, huh?
And they were really overhyping almost any punch that was thrown, especially in the main event. Stephen A. Smith, I believe he had Vargas winning through 7 or 8 rounds.
Yeah, I didn't know what the hell he was watching. But then again, that's why, real boxing fans don't really pay attention to ESPN and their commentary team. Stephen A. was just off. Like you said, they were overhyping everything, and they were calling a bunch of shots that didn't land. Especially the Vargas right hand. I don't know how many punches I felt like he didn't land completely.
Yeah, how many times did Smith say, "Oh, he hurt him with that"?
Yeah, I don't know, a ton, and it was just obnoxious. Again, you're not the only one. I hope that they don't invite him back, honestly, the only reason I thought he was there was to talk about Mayweather and Pacquiao. That's what I thought, because, Mayweather said, well, maybe we'll get to that later, but Mayweather sitting ringside. I thought Stephen A. Smith was just there to, just rub it in everybody's face like, hey, just let it marinate, like, oh, Pacquiao, Mayweather too. Besides that, he let me down there too.
And from what I saw last night, there's no need for Pacquiao Mayweather too, because to me, Pacquiao is still a great fighter, but he's not what he once was.
No, he's certainly
Pacquiao
not.
in his prime destroys Vargas in like 5 or 6 rounds.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, he takes him apart. And it was, in my opinion, even at this stage in Pacquiao's career, I felt like his performance was a little disappointing. I mean, he did drop Vargas in the second round with a nice left hand, but Vargas didn't really seem that hurt from it. Vargas was doing, in my opinion, he was doing his best impression of what he thought he could, trying to imitate Juan Manuel Marquez. He was doing subtle little back steps. He was trying to counterpunch him. He was trying to fire back whenever Pacquiao would let go, but he just wasn't that sharp. He didn't have
Marquez enough.
No, he doesn't have Marquez's boxing brain either. He doesn't have, he couldn't set up the shots with feints. He was just too predictable. Like you said, not fast enough. He didn't have enough power. Pacquiao being small and whatnot. But still, you look at Pacquiao and he just seemed content to win.
Which is what he's looked like for the last 3 or 4 years, I think.
Oh, yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Pacquiao, in my opinion, has been past his prime for, years now, maybe half a decade or so. But
he hadn't knocked anybody out since 2009.
No, and I don't give him too much flack for that, only because he's fought a lot of tough guys and he's the natural smaller man, and plus he looks aged. But against Vargas, in my opinion, he's rated in the top 10. But for me, with all the talent out there at 147, he's really a top 15, top 20 kind of guy. And without Top Rank's nurturing and incestuous matchmaking, I don't think Vargas gets a WBO title shot. But Pacquiao won, and if the Mayweather fight comes off, I don't know. So be it, I guess.
For what I saw, if Manny Pacquiao steps in the ring with Terrence Crawford, it's going to end badly for him.
Yeah, it is. And Bob Arum threw out a list of names after the fight, and Crawford happened to be one of them. Crawford, who else do they say? Danny Garcia, Vasil Lomachenko.
I read possibly Kell Brook today, but I think Kell Brook would destroy him too.
Yeah, I think Brook. And maybe even somebody like Thurman. Maybe they're a bit too much for him at this point. Certainly Crawford looks to be. But Pacquiao, he's still beating guys like Bradley clearly. He's still beating guys like Jesse Vargas clearly. So I think he can still compete at at a high level. But it just feels like the hourglass is about run out.
Yeah, and since it looks like that, if you schedule him to fight a Kell Brook or a Keith Thurman or one of those guys next June, the time might already be out by the time you get to then. Yeah,
and it may well be. Maybe that's. Maybe it's hard to say what Arum wants to do. Arum and Pacquiao have had a long relationship. I don't know if he wants to throw him to the wolves and try to milk a payday out of him before he leaves. I don't know if he just wants to try to match him up with another 140, 147 pounder under Top Rank's banner. I don't know. Honestly, it's hard to say at this point. But whatever Pacquiao chooses to do, it's I guess most of the boxing world will tune in. But I'm just hoping, because I like Manny Pacquiao as a fighter, and as a human being, he seems okay too. Of course, I don't always agree with all of his views, but I don't want to see him, wind up like so many other before him.
Yeah, but Bob Arum. Bob Arum would put his son into taking ass kicking if he could make millions of dollars off of it.
Yeah, he's certainly that kind of a guy.
All right, so we got 3 or 4 interesting fights coming up this weekend. Next weekend. We'll go ahead and talk about those. We'll start off Martin Murray against Dmitry Chudnyov. Did I get that right?
It's Chudanov.
I was close enough. All right. Because I don't think we're going to have too many shows where we talk about him again. His main fight was Chris Eubank Jr., who TKO'd him. Martin Murray, I think, really good fighter. It just seems like he's one of those guys that gets to a certain level, can't make the jump when he gets to the big time to fight the big fighters. George Groves, Arthur Abraham, Gennady Golovkin all took him out. What's your thoughts on this fight?
Well, I find it, an interesting. I find it an interesting fight because of Chudinov's level. For me, he's like a top, 20, 25 guy, top 30 guy in his division. Martin Murray looked a bit faded in the Groves fight. So for me, it looks to be about even contest. Chudinov's not he's not that good of a fighter, but technically he's pretty solid. He has a little pop behind his punches, but of course Murray, he's got a wonderful chin, and I think he could probably take anything Chudinov dishes out. Granted, Murray doesn't really hit a wall, but I think it's an interesting fight, and I think it could go either way. I'm a Martin Murray fan, and I'd like to see him win, but I don't know. Again, 50-50 fight could go either way.
All right, and we've got the WBA super featherweight champion, Jason Sosa, defending against Stephen Smith. Unfortunately, it's not Stephen A. Smith. Smith's probably biggest claim to fame was losing a title fight to Jose Pedraza. Sosa, of course, in his last fight, knocked out Javier Fortuna to win the super featherweight title. What's your take on this one? Does Smith have a chance?
I think Smith has a chance. Sosa to me isn't. He's not a top-tier 130-pounder, but he has progressed. I like him. Against Walters, he showed some grit.
I thought he looked a lot better against Fortuna.
Yeah, he did. He started to add a little nuance to his game. I mean, this is a guy, from what I understand, who didn't have a long amateur background. In fact, I don't think he had much of one at all. So he's kind of learning on the job. And like you said, against Fortuna, he had a little nuance to his game. He added a little more feints. He was jabbing a bit more. Just looked better all around. And, again, he showed that grit. Stephen Smith, he's not a big puncher, so I think Sosa's not going to respect whatever he has to, throw in return. So I think Sosa outworks him and wins a fairly clear decision. But, Smith he's a notch below Sosa in my opinion, but not all that much. Smith, he gave a decent account of himself against Pedraza. So this looks like about a 60-40 fight to me, and I think Sosa takes it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Sosa wins the fight by clear decision. Brings us to the heavyweights. Luis Ortiz, 25-0, 22 knockouts against Malik Scott, 38-2. They both have recently beat Tony Thompson, which, if it was 5 years ago, may be impressive. Now, not so much, but Thompson's still a solid fighter. Ortiz also stopped Bryant Jennings, who actually looked pretty decent against Klitschko. What was that, about a year and a half ago? Scott also beat Alex Lapaye. Go ahead. You're the translator.
I'm not even sure how you say it, Lapaye or something. Yeah, the guy who he also got stopped by Vladimir. Yeah,
he got destroyed by Vladimir. Also got knocked out by Derek Chisora. Deontay Wilder took him out. Ortiz against Scott. Does Scott have a chance?
I think Scott has a chance, albeit a small one. Scott, to me, looks pretty naturally gifted. I mean, I saw him fight Glazkov, and I thought he beat Glazkov. He's got a good, long, sharp jab. He's kind of like Wilder. He fights like Wilder, except he lacks the pop that Wilder does. And in the Wilder fight, I don't know, that looked almost like a dive to me. But I don't want to insinuate things that might not be there. But Scott's a pretty good, again, naturally gifted fighter. If he uses the jab all night, I think he can keep Ortiz at bay and give him a little trouble. But Ortiz, to me, again, he is getting up there in age. I think Ortiz is 37 or 38. Ortiz, to me, looks pretty well packaged, pretty well rounded. He clearly has a long amateur background. His accuracy, his sense of distance, his power, his speed, his balance, they're all there. He may be along with him and Povetkin, they may be the two most well-balanced fighters or heavyweights in the game. But I think it's an interesting fight. But seeing as Ortiz looks a bit, better rounded, He, has the power on his side. I think he probably takes Scott out in the late rounds.
Yeah, that's kind of what I think also. I just don't think Scott's got enough power to keep him off of him. I think Ortiz will eventually wear him down and beat him. That brings us to what I guess would be the main event, even though I never thought I'd say that was Samuel Vargas in the main event. But Danny Garcia defends his title against Samuel Vargas. Vargas's claim to fame was getting knocked out by Errol Spence. Any chance Vargas can pull off an upset here?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is maybe slightly better than the Rod Salka fight, which was clearly a mismatch. I mean, Samuel Vargas is okay. I mean, but he got destroyed by Errol Spence just a year ago. So I'm not even sure why this choice of opponents. But if Danny Garcia does go ahead and fight Keith Thurman, then again I can't give him too much crap for this. Seeing as he finally has something worthwhile lined up. But I just don't see Vargas as having much of a shot here. He doesn't really have good pop. We know Garcia can take a good clean shot on his chin. Vargas isn't particularly fast. He's just not particularly good. Again, just like Spence, except probably a bit later because Garcia isn't so assertive. Just like the Ortiz-Scott fight, I expect a late round KO, TKO.
Yeah, I just hope it's not a boring 12-round decision.
No, I mean, there's no reason for that. I mean, Garcia has to go out there and prove a point because what he's doing now is he's trying to hype the Keith Thurman fight for next year. So he's got to go out there and make a statement, and get us all excited for the upcoming fight.
All right, so before we wrap it up, I'm going to throw you a curveball because we didn't talk about this, but I forgot to bring it up last week. I'm from the Cincinnati area. I grew up watching Aaron Pryor, who recently passed away. I was just going to try to get your thoughts on Pryor. I think he was definitely the greatest junior welterweight I ever saw.
Yeah, I think it's a bit unfortunate that he started his career and he was ranked at 135 for the longest time because he wanted the best at 135. They just didn't want him, essentially forcing his hand and making a move up. And, he ended up staying in a division that I'm not particularly fond of. I like 140. He ended up being a dominant figure. I actually watched his career. I'm not old enough to have watched it in person, but, about a year ago, I watched all of his fights in full, and I saw clear progression in Aaron Pryor. I mean, at first he was kind of a go-getter, in your face, high work rate, good power, good speed, and then he showed some great boxing ability against Alexis Arguello, both fights which were great in my opinion. But I can certainly see the argument for him being the best 140-pounder ever. I think a lot of people might throw Julio Cesar Chavez in that discussion.
Yeah, but I think to me Chavez was probably better at lightweight, super featherweight, even, wasn't he?
No, I agree too. I certainly.
And I think
agree,
Pryor would have been too big for him.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, but I'm just saying in terms of resume, that's the way people would argue. But it's a bit unfortunate, and for Pryor's sake, it would have been nice to see him take on the very best of his. In a way, he was kind of like Kostis Tszyu. How Kostis Tszyu was very, he was very talented. Mostly dominated the 140-pound division for a while, but he never got the fights against Mayweather or De La Hoya or Mosley. Pryor,
and he waited too long to take the Hatton fight.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Pryor, in a sense, is he struggled with the same thing. I mean, he didn't get the Duran fight. Duran did offer him $750K. He never got the Leonard fight. Benitez, Cuevas. He never got any of those fights, and it's a bit unfortunate because those fights would have generated all sorts of revenue, and the Leonard Pryor fight is still one that's talked about.
Yeah, but the one thing is this, and I've met Aaron Pryor before. Aaron Pryor is a great guy. You're never going to meet a nicer guy. But Aaron Pryor didn't get to fight a lot of those guys because Aaron Pryor stopped himself. I mean, the cocaine addiction, especially from after the second fight against Arguello on, because if you remember after that, I think his only other fight was against Gary Hinton, who he beat by a split decision, I think, in 1985. And then, of course, he lost to Bobby Joe Young, which Bobby Joe Young couldn't have sniffed his jock when he had no problems. But that's the sad thing about Pryor. I mean, it was the guy that I'm not going to say would have beat Leonard because I don't tend to think he would have. I think Leonard would have outsmarted him, maybe beat him by decision or knocked him out late. And the same thing with Hearns, might have been too big. But I think a guy like Cuevas, I think he destroys. A guy like Benitez, I think he overwhelms, even though Benitez was a great defensive fighter. But I wouldn't put it past him to go to welterweight and beat Hearns and Leonard. But he kind of took that opportunity away anyways by basically being done in, 1983 in September.
Yeah, well, yeah, and not only that, I mean, if you look at the post-fight interview after the Lennox Blackmore fight, he says, him and his trainer talk about this, that, Leonard offered him a fight for $500,000. Pryor didn't think the money was in his favor. He didn't think it was enough money for him.
Yeah, but at some point you just got to bite the bullet to get the fight.
You've got to. Well, I mean, in my opinion, the Blackmore fight was, a few fights after the Cervantes fight, and he only made $50K against Cervantes, who was, by most accounts, I mean, he's a 140-pound legend.
Yeah,
I mean,
and he probably only made that much because they fought in Cincinnati, his hometown, which increased the gate.
Right. Well, and when you think about it, I mean, Sugar Ray Leonard made something like $43,000 in his debut. So like you said, that's one of those things you got to bite the bullet. But Roberto Duran offered him a fight for $750,000. Which he also talks about. I guess he was also shafted in the sense that Sugar Ray Leonard and Pryor also signed for a fight afterwards, and then then Leonard, of course, had the detached retina. But it's just unfortunate because I look at the 140-pound division. On his resume, he certainly made us all believe that he was a great fighter. It's just a bit unfortunate that he could have taken part in huge fights with the best of the best, Hearns, or Leonard, on and on. But I mean, he still, made a good account of himself. And the Arguello fights are considered classics, even though the first one has a bit of controversy. But he's a legend.
Well, and the thing is this: the fight people forget that would have been huge would have been him against Ray Mancini.
Yeah, that would have been an interesting and entertaining scrap. And again, it's one of those fights that it's just a bit unfortunate it never came off.
Well, what was the guy's name? It was like 1980. It had all the big fights set up. His name was Howard or Harold something.
Oh shit!
But I think he at one point offered them a ton of money to fight each other, but he ended up going to jail. So.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if it would have been 40 years later, he could have just ran for president, and they could have still fought. But now, I just wanted to bring it up because Aaron Pryor is one of the great fighters that ever lived that I think a lot of younger people don't even know about. But you can catch most of his fights on YouTube. And like I said, Antonio Cervantes was a great champion, and he destroyed him in 4 rounds. I mean, he beat Miguel Montiel, who was a really good fighter. Who was the guy with the bald spot from Michigan? DeJuan Johnson?
DeJuan Johnson?
Yeah, which was actually, that was a great fight. I think he ended up knocking Johnson out in the 9th round, but I think Johnson even knocked him down.
Yeah, well, actually, DeJuan Johnson is part of the reason I think Hearns beats Pryor. DeJuan Johnson, in my opinion, was kind of like a poor man's version of Hearns.
He was long, he was lean, and that really gave Pryor some trouble.
Yeah, no, it certainly did. And he dropped him in the first round. And I remember watching that fight and thinking about the Hearns fight, because they fought in the amateurs, but I don't.
Hearns was like 17 at the time, I think.
Yeah, Pryor was, much more experienced and on and on. But yeah, DeJuan Johnson had Pryor, we talk a lot about Pryor and how he was knocked down and he got right back up, like he was knocked down against Cervantes, he was knocked down against a number of people and got right back up. But against DeJuan Johnson, he was legitimately hurt on a few occasions. But, then Johnson ran out of steam and Pryor ended up overwhelming him. But, that was a great fight, of course. But, it was exciting to watch every single one of Pryor's fights.
And I believe this, Pryor would have destroyed Chavez.
You may well be right. I think it personally it would be a competitive fight. I think Pryor was a bit, better rounded. And
I think it would be for a while, but I think Pryor was just too strong and too fast.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I like Pryor's versatility. Again, he in the early fights he was a real go-getter, and then against Arguello, he boxed a bit more and showed that he could use lateral movement, and again had some finer details to his game.
Yeah, in the second fight, I think people forget the second Pryor-Arguello fight was a great fight also. It was more one-sided in the first fight, but it was still a hell of a fight.
Yeah, I thought it was a damn good fight. I wouldn't say it was quite on par with the first fight, but it was certainly a very good fight. But of course, it kind of eliminated the doubt from the first fight, with all the controversy surrounding it and whatnot. But yeah, it eliminated the doubt from the first fight. Whatever Pryor used in the first fight, he didn't need to beat Arguello. But yeah, it was definitely an excellent fight, and I think even a few of the judges' scorecards were pretty close.
Yeah, the thing I remember about that fight and watching that fight, I'd have been like 14, 15 years old at the time, was Tony Danza jumping around outside of the ring cheering on Alexis Arguello. If you go back, find Pryor Arguello 2 on YouTube, watch the fight, Tony Danza was on there as much as anybody else.
Yeah, watching the video footage, I don't quite remember that, but I may have to go back and revisit it.
Yeah, watch it again. You can't miss him. He's screaming and hollering the whole time. But any final words or any final thoughts this week?
Any final thoughts? I've been paying attention to the boxing news, and nothing all that interesting has really popped up. Aside from the WBA, which said that if Klitschko and Anthony Joshua fight, they'll sanction it as a WBA super title, which would make it for almost all of the belts. That's pretty interesting to me, but aside from that, I don't really have much.
So does that mean the winner will also be the silver champion, the intercontinental champion, and the USBA champion?
And the diamond champion. Don't
diamond
forget
champion, and I don't know.
Correct. And they'll also be the champion in recess, champion in waiting. They'll also be
they just need to fight each other, and the winner to fight Deontay Wilder, and then we'll have a heavyweight champion. Yeah, well,
I'd love to see is, hopefully, we get a speedy recover from Wilder, but what I would like to see is, because the Klitschko-Joshua fight, if it takes place, it's not going to happen until early next year. Klitschko, again, came up with an injury. I don't know, maybe it's time to hang him up.
Yeah, I think I saw they were talking about maybe like May or something, March or May.
Yeah, and that makes sense, I guess, if Klitschko needs time to heal and Joshua's fighting soon. But what I would like to see is, since that fight is happening, in March, April, May, something like that, I'd love to see Wilder, take on his mandatory Povetkin, and then I'd like to see, later on in the year, the winner of Povetkin-Wilder and the winner of Joshua Klitschko for
and maybe a Luis Ortiz thrown in there if he takes care of Malik Scott.
Yeah. The problem with Ortiz is he hasn't really established himself as a mandatory with all the work, inner workings going on.
Yeah, I'm just talking about this. I think the guy's one of the top 5 heavyweights in the world.
Oh, no, absolutely. Especially what he did to Brian Jennings, who I thought was a legitimate top 10 guy. He looked more impressive
gave Klitschko a legitimate fight, one of the few he's had.
Right. Yeah, and
I think he actually even won like 3 or 4 rounds.
Yeah, he was game, but against Ortiz, he was just outclassed. Ideally, it would be nice to see, again, Joshua and then Klitschko and then Povetkin and Wilder, and whoever wins that later in the year, yeah, I would love to see a first defense against Luis Ortiz. And I guess if Tyson Fury kind of enters the mix, I guess, we can throw him in the...
Yeah, but you all know we're going to have to see Prince Charles Martin fight for the title again, and David Hay and all these assholes. They'll give us a bunch of stuff we don't want to see, and after 5 of those, they'll give us one we want to see, and then we get 5 crap fights again.
Yeah, a bunch of bullshit. Frezzo Kendo will get his WBA mandatory shot and whatever the hell, I don't know.
Yeah, Frezzo Kendo's still around, too. He's still in the rankings.
Yeah, this is what I don't understand.
He lost to Evander Holyfield, who was like 48 years old at the time, like 10 years ago.
Yeah, well, Frezzo Kendo was able to, I think, sue the WBA because of some controversial decision that he got, and so now he's in a position of power. Like he has apparently earned a shot. none of this I really care about. All I really give a shit about is who the man is, who the undisputed champion is. And right now, the ring hasn't, I don't think they've stripped Tyson Fury yet. I think that'll happen soon. But that's all I really give a shit about. I don't care about any of these trinkets. I just want to see the best fight the best, and whoever comes out on top, they're the man, and that's what matters.
And hopefully Fury can get his ass straightened out so somebody can beat him to death.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice. I mean, Fury's a good fighter for a big man, but unless he sews up his personal issues, we're all just gonna play the waiting game.
He has a beautiful voice, though.
Yes, he does. Oh, his post-fight singing is glorious.
For a 7-foot, 300-pound boxer, he sings really well.
Yeah, he does. And he's, in my opinion, he kept his shit together. He's a charismatic figure too. I mean, not everything that he says is likable, nor.
Yeah, but that's why people want to see him.
Exactly.
He's one of those guys you either like him because of the way he acts and you want to see him beat somebody's ass, or you hate him and want to see him get knocked out. It's kind of like what made Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson so much money.
Exactly. I mean, and that's kind of why I like Tyson Fury. I mean, not necessarily on a personal level, but he drew attention to the heavyweight division, and now he's in some reclusive state. I don't know. It's just the soft.
I think they call it rehab, don't they?
Yeah, I don't know, coke addiction or whatever. Yeah.
But, all right, we'll go ahead and wrap this up this week. Next week, you better come back and check out the fight I've been waiting for years, Kovalev-Ward. So we'll try to have a special guest for everybody on also. Make sure you check out thegruelingtruth.net to catch all of our past shows, all of our articles, all of our interviews with former boxing legends like Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, Marvis Frazier, Carlos Palomino. All those you can find on thegruelingtruth.net. So for Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.